Okay, folks, you're very welcome to this second panel of today's event. My name's Aidan Campbell. I'm from the Centre for Cross-Border Cooperation. Almost fell over the title of the organisation, sorry about that. And I'm the Research Programme Development Manager. And I'm just facilitating this bonus panel, I suppose we could call this morning, looking at remote and hybrid working. I suppose, like, when we're thinking about remote or hybrid working, probably lots of us think it's a fairly new concept. But I come from a rural development background. In fact, I used to work along with Kate for about, a good few years anyway. We'll leave it at that. And I remembered when I was thinking about this panel the other night, something popped into my head about an initiative called Connaught Telecottage. And like the Northwest has already been mentioned, Dundalk and Newry have already been mentioned, but I thought we'd better give Fermanagh a mention as well. And Connaught's a small, I don't even know if you would call it a village, it's more of a townland in West Fermanagh. I think it's about 15 miles from Enniskillen, but it's right on the border. So I typed into Google Connaught Telecottage, and an article came up from the Irish Independent in 1998. And that article basically was telling us, reminding me about two people called Sheila and Michael McCaffrey, who were IT professionals, but also part-time farmers. And they developed what was called Connaught Integrated Teleworking Initiative. But Connaught Telecottage had stuck in my head because it was such a cute name, obviously. And basically what they started out back in the mid-90s with offering data management services to local companies. But their big breakthrough came when they landed a contract for a group of American hospitals providing overnight transcription services for doctors. And at one stage they had 16 employees. And the article went on then to talk about ISDN lines and modems and faxes, all cutting-edge technology for those of us of a certain, I suppose, vintage. Obviously very redundant now. But the issues in the article about reduced commuting, about better productivity, about rural development, about flexible working and reduced costs, those are still live issues, I suppose, in the discussion that we're probably going to have now. And that's by way of context, I suppose, to introducing us to this panel discussion this morning. We're delighted to be joined by three people with their own insights into these issues from a policy and practice perspective. We're joined by Sarah Daly, first, Executive Director of Creative Spark here in Dundalk, an award-winning co-working space. Kate Clifford, CEO at Rural Community Network, a voluntary membership organisation supporting rural communities and groups across Northern Ireland. And Dónal Kearney, who's Head of Programmes at Grow Remote, a social enterprise trading for impact. They're on a mission to solve the problems of remote work through community building, training and advocacy. So how we're going to work, we have a bit less time than some of the other panels, so I'm going to ask a few questions of each of our contributors, and then if we may have time just for one or two questions at the end, we'll see how we go. So first question then to Sarah. Sarah, can you tell us a bit about Creative Spark and the co-working space you've developed there? And maybe tell us a bit about some of the reasons why people are coming and booking space in your hub.
Yeah, thanks, Aidan. So Creative Spark is a creative enterprise and training centre in Dundalk, and we were established in 2012, and we provide space, supports and service, clusters within the creative industries. And I suppose in 2012, when we opened the original building, we had a co-working space which had 6 desks in it. And nobody wanted it. Nobody wanted it. They didn't really know what co-working was. I had seen it in other countries, and I thought it was a really practical solution for people, but everybody wanted their own office space with a door that they could close and a key that they could lock it with. But in about 2017, 2018, that started to change. And during 2018, 2019, it was full. We were trying to turn other offices into co-working spaces. So at that stage, we started looking at building another, or opening another location in the town centre that would be purely co-working. So we identified a premises in the town centre which was semi-derelict, and part of that was about regeneration as well, and also having a presence in the town centre. So there were kind of few reasons for that. But a big driving force for that was the fact that there were at that time, there were about 5,500 people leaving Dundalk every morning for work. And we were hearing stories of people sitting on the M1 for 2 hours in each direction. And we're looking at that whole move towards supporting remote working and the effects that could have on the environment, on lifestyle, on communities. And that was a big driver for us in pushing for supporting remote working. So we established, we hoped to open in 2020. Things went a little bit astray in 2020. So we didn't actually open that remote working space until 2022. But it's thriving now. We also expanded in our original building. We have 18 co-working desks in Creative Spark, and they're full. And downtown is about half full with dedicated desks, and then we have a lot of ad hoc workers as well. And I was just looking at, who those people are and what their motivations are. In the downtown hub, about 80% of them are employees that are remote workers, and they're either working for companies in the north or companies in the States. So there is a lot of remote working happening. So those people might be having to go to Belfast or maybe having to go to Dublin, and they're able to work 2 or 3 days a week in a hub in Dundalk, not in their own homes, so that they're meeting other people. There was also the Brexit issue where people who were maybe working for a European or an American company had to have an IP address in the south, so that drove a lot of people to us as well. So I suppose there are lots of motivations, but I think quality of life is a big motivator for most people.
Thanks for that, Sarah. Kate, going to move on. RCN, I know because I was there at the time, commissioned research published in 2023 on the policy landscape for remote working, north and south. What were the main findings coming out of that comparative study and comparing policy developments that were happening on each side of the border?
So I'm going to do here's one we prepared earlier. So that report's available online. Thank you, Anthony. So we asked the Centre for Cross-Border Cooperation to undertake that study for us. And I suppose the idea was we were looking across the border. We were aware of the connected hubs. We had been involved or engaged with a project around 5G new thinking across the UK, understanding that the internet was a gateway for rural communities to maybe compete on a global stage where geography would not be a limiting factor for many rural communities. And we saw the connected hubs. We'd been very engaged with Grow Remote at a distance, kind of looking at what they were doing for people who wanted to live in the communities that they'd been reared in, or they wanted to go back home, but they wanted to stay connected and able to work in, take opportunities up in, for companies that would normally or ordinarily be located elsewhere. So we looked and said, well, what's made that happen in the south, and why is it not happening as much or as easily in the north? And things happened that we looked at where in the Republic of Ireland there was and I'm going to read these out, there was like a proactive policy, a strong government support for like the likes of connected hubs with tax incentives. There was regional policy that actually suggested that it took rural and remote into account, so it kind of rural-proofed its regional spread of jobs across the Republic of Ireland. Now that came with, there was a whole insight into how secondary or tertiary level education was spread right across the south of Ireland, and then behind that came the idea of spreading all of the public service jobs across the Republic of Ireland. So it had that idea was already being pushed and promoted at a government level around really strong regional balance, and they were being called to account by particularly along the Western Corridor, by politicians and communities along the Western Corridor. There was a whole push around climate change, and there was this idea that there were already really good hubs, and hub working had already become, they were being embedded in communities across the Republic of Ireland, and partly because of the investment that was made in third level education, along those corridors. People were coming together because they had the skills, and they were coming together and they were setting up their own hubs. They wanted to work where they lived. In Northern Ireland, we didn't have that. So we had who will be surprised, we had a fragmented approach. We had no coordinated rural remote working strategy, limited investment. There were only a few dedicated hubs. And I was reflecting, because Aidan and I were talking before, and Sarah on a call this week before this session, and it was like loads of our community groups invested in internet cafes, and they got their fingers burnt because the technology moved on so quickly, and the ISDN lines then changed to home lines, and everything moved so quickly that lots of our community groups who had tried the technology as being a solution and a hub, they just fell away. They got their fingers burnt with nobody was coming in to use them. There was no privacy in them. They just had like one room, and you sat around with your computers and you couldn't bring your coffee in. So they internet cafes, but they were really just desk spaces. And then the other thing that happened around that, remote working was happening, but it wasn't being, the policy for distribution of jobs across Northern Ireland really wasn't rural-proofed at all. So that policy was written by the Department of Finance, but they didn't do any rural proofing in terms of that policy. So what we discovered, and what the report discovered, is that rural communities and workers are really interested in remote and hybrid work, and people wanted to do that, and we've seen that since 2020. People want to work from home. They want to be integrated into their communities. They want to be able to address the climate issues. They don't want to sit 2 hours in traffic. Health and well-being, mental health and well-being has become a huge priority for people where work doesn't come first. And we could see that those models were being addressed elsewhere, but certainly not in Northern Ireland. The other thing I think is that two things happened in Northern Ireland. We had the pandemic, which just escalated and catapulted us all to become able to work from home. But the other thing that happened in Northern Ireland was Project Stratum. And people got full fibre to premises, or got full fibre to home, and ISDN lines were done away with, and people all of a sudden had really good broadband connectivity. And on the back of that, lots of people began to work from home. And what we've seen over time, and what the report says, is that, broadband gaps were huge, transport gaps are huge in Northern Ireland, but there is a potential there for us to take the model from the south and to develop that in the north. But we need to have leadership, we need to have investment, and we need to have that behaviour modelled by government departments with that real remote working. For me, the report found that, I suppose, in terms of the recommendations, was that to rural-proof remote working, to allow it to happen, enable it to happen, give grants and support to digital infrastructure. While Project Stratum has rolled out in Northern Ireland, there are still not spots. Aidan will not be surprised to know that I'm still paying for 2 broadband signals, one for one side of the house and one for the other. The cross-border cooperation potential and the ability to address back-to-back development through proper, connected, remote working is absolutely, it could be a game changer for our border regions, but we need to exploit it, and we need the policies to drive that. And we need absolutely to invest in our small and medium-sized enterprises, training and digital upskilling in rural areas to allow this to happen, which is exactly to look south, learn from what they've done, to look broad around the world and look what they've done, and then change the policies in the north to really make that happen.
Thanks, Kate. And just as a point of information, Project Stratum, for those who don't know, maybe coming from the south of the border, was a big investment in rural broadband in Northern Ireland. I think it reached something like 80,000 premises over 3 or 4 years. It's actually finished now as a contract. But that was what that investment was, yeah. So thanks, Kate, for taking us through the findings of the report. Dónal, to yourself now, could you tell us a bit about Grow Remote and the work that you've been doing to develop remote and hybrid working right across the island?
Yeah, thanks, Aidan. We've just heard from Kate a brilliant overview of the situation on both sides of the border. And earlier Sarah mentioned 2017, 2018 as a kind of shifting point, and that was actually the starting point, the sort of kernel of the idea for Grow Remote, bringing together what was a very niche idea, a group of volunteers who are mostly based in the west of Ireland, seeing remote employment as a solution to what was happening in towns and villages in rural and regional Ireland, outside the cities, rural brain drain. And they came together, a lot of people who were and had been working remotely for decades, but again, it was kind of hidden. These brands maybe weren't very well known. Started running events around the country, ran our first conference in September 2018 down in Tralee, followed by another one in Tubbercurry and Sligo in 2019. And there were remote leader meetups that were happening, which was just exchange of information. It was events like this where people could talk about remote work specifically. Bear in mind, this was 2018, 2019. So when we set up as a company limited by guarantee in January 2020, we had this network, we had this community, and it became a massive need. There was a huge mainstream need as of March, April 2020. We translated that need into training modules, which became available very quickly through a contract with the Laois Offaly Education and Training Board, which has since become the largest national state-funded training program across Europe that's specifically on remote work. So we were able to just use that network, use the knowledge and wisdom pre-COVID and create something that was in huge demand. So the model as a social enterprise when we set up was about supply and demand. Supply, working with employers to try and talk about remote jobs and maybe hiring remotely and what that could look like for them. And then demand, the actual driving the desire to work remotely, and also the opportunities, trying to increase the opportunities to work remotely. So that's been our model since. As well as the training, we do advocacy work, and we're next week going to be going into Leinster House. Again, most of our work is kind of, maybe for reasons that Kate explained, it's kind of focused on the Republic, but we set up last year an all-party working group on remote work, chaired by previously Senator Emer Curry, now TD Emer Curry, and that's going to be happening next week, where we're pushing for various policy changes that I will go into later on, because they're definitely very relevant for both sides of the border. But as well as the advocacy work, there's a huge community element, and that's where Kate and I were talking about the number one challenge we identified, certainly during COVID. But bear in mind, COVID was an emergency situation where people were trapped, was social isolation, and that remote workers experience loneliness and isolation more so than the other forms of workers. And so we continued that pre-COVID, that 2019 idea of the meetups, building on it every year. Took a little while. We only really got back to it in 2022. But last year we ran over 300 social meetups all across the country for nearly 2,500 remote workers. As a social enterprise, we're tracking the social and economic impact of those meetups, and we see huge benefits not only to the local economies, but also social, personal well-being, time spent with family, time spent as caregivers, and also Volunteer Ireland has a great statistic. 1 in 4 remote workers ends up volunteering in their local community. So there's loads there. We're trying to cover it all. We do a lot of research. But just to finish with something we heard from Fergal from IBEC earlier, but we would keep a very close eye on a range of both national and international research and data. We now know that 73% of employers are prioritising remote and hybrid employment in the Republic of Ireland. And from the CSO Labour Force Survey, which just reported 2 months ago, there's a 1% rise of remote and hybrid employment in the Republic. That is up to 36% nationwide, so it's very high. It is different in the Republic from the North, but it just shows there's a huge opportunity, and so maybe later on I can talk about some of the greater policy initiatives too.
That's great. Thanks a million for that, Dónal, and great to have you here with us today sharing the story of Grow Remote. Sarah, I'm going to come back to you then, and I suppose if you were talking to a decision maker, what would be your 2 or 3 key asks from a policy perspective as someone who's managing a remote working hub?
Well, I suppose there, like both Kate and Dónal have said, there are a lot of supports in the south, the connected hubs, which I don't know if everybody knows what connected hubs is, but it's a sort of a mapping and a website that showcases about 400 hubs all over Ireland, and they're from rural to urban, tiny ones to bigger ones, but people can book anywhere they want to go. You know, if you're going down to Kerry for the day, you can book a desk in Kerry if you're a member of the Connected Hubs network. So it's very useful, and they do a lot of work supporting the hubs, I suppose. So yes, keep supporting Connected Hubs. It's a very valuable resource for us as hub managers, but we also meet regularly as hub managers, and we can share our own woes and worries. I suppose in terms of policy, like there was a lot of talk about tax earlier, but I think if employers can be supported or incentivized to support their employees working from a hub as opposed to working from home, because I do think that addresses the isolation piece. So if there were better tax incentives for employers paying for those employees rather than them having to pay for it themselves, because most of the people that would work in our remote working hub, our co-working hubs, would be paying for their own desks, and that's maybe not feasible for everybody. So that would be one thing, but tax is a big issue today. I think, yeah, maybe the support for the people who are actually working remotely. I don't know, I don't ask anybody about their tax issues, but I suppose there could be, there's obviously a lot there that could be dug into in terms of supporting the remote
so
workers,
access to independent advice and support around
yeah,
tax. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that, sir. Kate, the RCN report that you have with you, I think it'd be fair to say, and I think you've reflected on it already in your initial comments, that the sort of policy landscape for remote and hybrid working north of the border was underdeveloped. So as an organisation, or as a direct leader of an organisation committed to rural development and border proofing, what are the key next steps that you'd like to see in Northern Ireland to promote remote and hybrid working and contribute to the Department for Economy's key aim to deliver balanced regional growth?
So I suppose, like, my entire working life has been around supporting rural communities to do what they do best and supporting them to thrive. And I suppose there's an opportunity here for us with what happened during the pandemic, with a digital revolution happening, to offer really high quality jobs in rural areas and to unlock the potential of those communities to be the host agency for those high quality jobs without the necessity for people to be in any way disadvantaged by their geography. So having left the EU and having suffered the rupture of Brexit by way of rural development policy, I'd love to see a policy agenda, a rural development policy agenda for Northern Ireland that looks to the potential to grow remote and hybrid working in a way that's supported by communities. So I think when you look at what we do in terms of community development, part of the work that we do happens because the communities that we serve and that we look after are in some sort of stress or distress. So they come together to address a need, whether it's a childcare need, whether it's women in the community who need to come together for social contact because they want to create employment or create jobs. So right across Northern Ireland, we have people who come together in rural areas to solve problems. Grow remote and connected hubs are one of the solutions to people working who are working in a hybrid or a remote fashion. There's an opportunity with proper policy and legislation, whether it's voucher schemes, to support communities to now provide those spaces, to provide the social spaces, to provide the well-being spaces, to provide the advice and guidance, whether it's tax advisors coming down, talking to communities, and to provide that enabling environment through which then people can remain locally, can act globally, as we always talk about, but then who can then support their communities to grow and become vibrant and sustainable places for people to thrive without damaging the environment, which is a huge issue for us, but also that growing of community spirit and people's own well-being. I think it speaks to so much, but the policy change has to be there around incentivisation, supporting our communities, the community halls and the community wealth that we have, the derelict buildings that exist within many of our community, our small towns and villages, and encouraging those to transform into spaces where people can be connected and supported to do the work that they want to do without having to leave their communities. I think it speaks to that rural development, that new rural development policy.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to learn, and certainly a lot of potential north of the border to learn from the experience in the south. Dónal, back to you. Since 2018, Grow Remote has been gathering research and insights about remote and hybrid work. What's the data telling us today? And what do you think the major opportunities are for remote employment in 2025 and beyond?
Well, as I mentioned, we're convening the all-party group in Leinster House next week. And I'll give maybe two of our big asks or two of the big talking points. But as I sit here today, I'm actually thinking that there's an opportunity right now in this room, maybe for agencies or employers or individuals who are interested in doing something north of the border. We have this infrastructure. We've heard it's very well developed, even by European standards, certainly by international standards in the Republic. But if there are people who are interested in coming together, Grow Remote's in a position to convene an initial conversation or something that might translate some of this learning into very practical policy opportunities. We can try to progress that as a group here today. Just come to me afterwards or find me on LinkedIn. But in terms of what we're talking about, there's kind of two big opportunities that we're talking to the Irish government about, but that are equally as valid north of the border. There's a big EU piece of research published by Eurofound just last year. It puts the Republic of Ireland second to the Netherlands in terms of the percentage of jobs that could be done remotely but aren't. So there are up to 350,000 jobs in the Republic that could be done remotely. They're teleworkable by European terminology. So by translating those into remote jobs, by detaching them from an on-site premises, or even by making them flexible, you see a trickle-down effect of massive benefits to the local communities, economic benefits that the rural areas would see, as well as benefits that we're seeing to make the business case for employers, for individuals in terms of well-being. Again, IBEC has done a lot of research in their recent report on well-being. So that's one, but maybe the greater opportunity is actually to look across Europe. Grow Remote takes a very, very close analysis of opportunities across Europe, and we see on any given month there's usually over 100,000 remote jobs available. They can be drawn down in any European state or in any community based on skills and talent. So the talent pool is absolutely huge. We'll be calling, this is in our pre-budget submission, which we just published a few weeks ago. We'll be calling for a national target for remote job creation. And again, this is something that could be talked about in the north, where there's a responsibility or a quota or a target to get these jobs down from the cloud, from the European cloud, into local communities so that the local government sees the tax benefits. So we've calculated that by attracting 1,000 jobs to Ireland, again, these jobs can end up in Italy, in Spain, in Portugal, in any given European state, we could bring down 20 million euros in GDP and an additional 10 million euros in tax revenue. That's just 1,000 jobs. So if we had a quota for 10,000 jobs out of the 100,000, and again, that's any given month, so it's multiples of that annually, that's a huge opportunity. And it's not limited to the Republic. It could be drawn down north of the border too. So there's lots to talk about. We're trying to progress those opportunities by convening that all-party group and by working directly with employers. We have an employer partnership program where we have one-to-one bespoke partnerships. No fees involved. It's all about conversation. It's all about being at the table and trying to influence these types of conversations at policy level, both nationally and internationally. So again, anybody, you're the experts in the room. We just try to bring people together. Anyone has any insights you'd like to share, please grab me. Thanks very much.
Dónal, thanks very much for that. And I think, folks, we're nearly run out of time for our conversation, but I think just in summing up, I suppose remote work and hybrid work is something that isn't going away. I think the data is showing, like in both jurisdictions, there are significant proportions of the population who are working hybrid and will continue to work hybrid. There are challenges, obviously, in terms of cross-border. Rose on panel one referred and reflected on some of those. And Dónal has obviously talked about social isolation as an issue. But there are huge upsides or potential upsides as well in terms of climate change, carbon reduction, quality of life, inclusion of women and disabled people, and the flexibility that remote and hybrid can bring. So folks, I'm going to draw our panel to a close now, and just ask you to show your appreciation for our three experts here today.
Good morning, everyone. I've just left my programme up there on the thing. Sorry, not planning to move around too much here. So my name is Caitriona Mullan, and I'm going to be facilitating this panel. I'm not going to say anything more about myself. You can read it in the programme, and that goes also for our speakers. I'll let them all introduce themselves in terms of the questions that they're going to address. But essentially, I suppose just before I go into the actual questions for the panel, and just to say we have Professor Kristel Miller on my right, who is leading the Epic Futures NI research for Ulster University, Annmarie, who everyone also knows, the Border People Project and Centre for Cross-Border Cooperation for a long time. There's not many who know as much as Annmarie about the particular issues associated with cross-border mobility on the island. Manus Reid, who is another person who knows deeply the experience of workers, particularly in the border region, who have all of those needs for information and understanding from people's stories what the actual difficulties are. And then Owen Reidy, who's the General Secretary of the Irish Congress of Trade Unions. Owen, delighted to have you here too. As with everything, you come prepared for chairing something, and then you listen to the sessions beforehand, and then you think, well, okay, there's a little bit of contextualization of this conversation based on some of the stuff that's been said already. I think one of the things that strikes me particularly is that I suppose we're having this conversation about an all-island labour market at a time post-pandemic when the spatial nature of our economy on the island, generally in Europe, between cities and regions, has changed, and digitally, I think globally, we've had these sort of spatial dynamic changes in the economy. So that's the context in which we're having that. I'm very, very struck by some of the remarks of the previous panel about the implications for rural economies and balanced economic growth of bringing people back into the office full time. And I think there are questions that we need to ask about that particular strategy and say, has the evidence that was spoken about in the last session been put about the implications of something like that for workforce, but also for rural communities, also for climate, and so on. The thing I would say about this event is that it's, for me, if you go to one event on North Southery every year, go to this one, because it's actually where you get people who are really engaged, who have huge amounts of knowledge in the room, and who are in that network, that community of practice, who have been working, some of us for longer than we'd like to admit, on these issues. So I would say to anybody who's new to this conversation, or new to the sector, or maybe new to their organisation or their departments, get involved. There's a huge amount of depth of knowledge in the room. Network, get to know people, and there are plenty of people who have knowledge that might be useful to you. And I would also say to those from government departments, these issues that we're discussing today are not legacy issues to do with an agreement from 25 years ago. These are really, really pertinent to where we are economically on the island now. So there's a renewal of, I suppose, interest and vigour around this, and probably a renewal of expectations about what the role of governments are. Again, I'm very struck by the fact that the last time we were building up a head of steam on an all-island economy and an all-island labour market was around 2007. And that, in a sense, gave way to the economic crisis and the crash, and then various other things which ended up with Brexit. So I think there is a sense at this stage, when we're talking about an all-island labour market, a sense of the idea of going back and picking up some threads. I'm very conscious also from my work in Europe. One of my portfolio pieces is to support the B Solutions Initiative, which is a trans-EU initiative by DG Regio, delivered by the Association of European Border Regions, to actually tackle legal and administrative obstacles on borders for mobility issues such as labour markets. And in that, there is a clear role for legislators when it comes down to it on some of these issues. Some of these can be solved by new procedures, some of them can be solved by collaboration and bilateral agreements, and some of them need legislation. And I think that's a key point that we might come back to. In Europe, we're dealing with not just the challenges outlined in the Draghi report, but also everything that's happened since economically. Huge pragmatism is required of all member states. And again, when it comes to cross-border working and the potential and the reward, I think Fergal O'Brien referred to, the reward is considerable if we actually go to this with the energy that we should. The reward of unlocking cross-border labour markets, on this island is considerable. It can help hugely with the pragmatism that's required, the pivot that Ireland's going to require as a member state, particularly because of the current situation with regard to trade and the markets that Irish companies are trading into. At a European level, we also have a huge imperative around solving these issues as cross-border labour markets, because 30% of the EU's population lives in a border region. That's 150 million people living in border regions. That's not small potatoes. So anytime you're tempted to think that this is a minority issue, it's always very hard to do things like get data on who's living on what side of the border. The better thing to do is look at the data of who's in the border region, rather than trying to work out, because there are always these sort of areas of fluidity. Nevertheless, border regions are actual economic growth areas and zones, and this island could really benefit from thinking of amplifying itself on that basis. We have a need for urgent economic resilience, and we need to drive up our innovation scores. We have an energy transition to deliver. We have a transition for sustainable construction, massive opportunities, and the idea of having a thriving labour market on an external border of the EU, where the neighbouring territory is still in the single market, is a unique opportunity. So we are, between the Good Friday Agreement, between all of the arrangements that we have post-Brexit, and all of those things, we are coming down with the facilitative governance to do this. We don't need any more strategies, but we're very, very good at strategizing. It's the drive-through and it's the implementation. And I think that's the note on which I want to go to the panel, which is, from the perspective of each of you, what are the biggest issues facing cross-border employees? What are the benefits? What are the wins in removing obstacles? And what needs to happen to do this? So, Annmarie, I'm going to start with you, and then I'm going to go to Kristel. Isn't that the right order we discussed? Manus, Kristel, and then Owen. Sorry. Something had to give. Okay, Annmarie.
That's brilliant. So thanks so much. So, yeah, I've been doing this for quite a while now. The Border People Project has been around for many, many years, and I've been working on it for almost 17. We've been very busy in that time. The amount of obstacles that people come across in their everyday life are huge numbers, so it's going to be really difficult to just focus in on just a few today. The LEAF report, the All-Ireland Labour Market Report, was really helpful to us because it gave us a chance to pull it all into one document, the stuff that we knew that we were working with over the years, and many of them haven't really changed. Apart from the remote working aspect, many of the challenges that individuals encountered 20 years ago, they still encounter today, which is unfortunate. However, if we think about just a few of the challenges then, so we'll not go into too many details, the main one is the lack of information. People are making huge life decisions, career decisions, with very little information. Frequently that works out really well. They say a good job and they take it across the border, and that's brilliant. Border people tends to hear about when things go wrong. And because they haven't had access to good information in the first place, frequently people are setting off on the wrong path, and it's very, very difficult for them to put themselves onto the right path because they've gone too far down it. So they don't want to put their hand up and go, oops, I got something wrong there. Perhaps I haven't declared something, I haven't done something that I'm obliged to do. And they find themselves outside the system. So a lack of information is one of the main concerns that we would have in the project. Now, we do tend to try and take the single jurisdiction information that's available and try and combine it so that it's useful on a cross-border basis. Much of that information is aimed at frontier workers. They're by large the largest group of individuals that get in touch with us. Now, if they do find information, or if they find the information that we have helpful, that's great. But frequently they need support and advice to figure it all out, because it isn't straightforward. It's complicated. It's a complicated world to juggle 2 tax systems, 2 social security systems, 2 employment law systems, and all the other things that comes with cross-border employment and having a foot in each jurisdiction. So the project can provide so much information, but where the heavy lifters are within the mainstream advice organisations, north and south. That's who does the heavy lifting for our project, for other initiatives that are out there. They're at the coalface dealing with these really difficult, complex situations that people find themselves in. So we would find that individuals say to us, we have problems accessing the information, and then we have problems accessing advice and support then to figure it all out. We have to remember as well that the advice sectors are working in the dark as well. There's not much information available to them. So there's an awful lot of collaboration needed in order to help people out. And the project does help with that. And we're really, really grateful to the organisations who are sitting behind the scenes with no shining light on them, and they are absolutely convinced that they are going to do whatever it takes to help the individuals that sit in front of them. So we have advisors in Derry, in Donegal, in Newry, in Fermanagh, all over, collaborating behind the scenes on maybe one particular case, because it's so complicated they need bits of advice from all over. These are independent organisations. This is free information and advice. It's trustworthy. It takes a holistic approach as well. It looks at all of the person, not just the one question that they have. Frequently they will come to us and it starts with tax, but maybe it goes on to other things. So the collaboration that's needed to combat the lack of information and the lack of support, I suppose, that they can get is really, that's a core component to putting things right. Ultimately, a lot of the problems happen because people fall between the cracks in the systems. The systems weren't built for them. They're an afterthought, or perhaps a frontier worker is lumped together as a migrant worker. 2 very different sets of workers with very different rights and entitlements. But this happens because they're not in legislation, they're not in policy in the first instance. And as Rose had mentioned earlier on, that recognition on a legal capacity and within policy is going to be really important, because those rights and entitlements then will filter down. The information that they need has to come from the top. This is something that the Centre called upon, for example, last year in the Department for the Economy's Good Jobs consultation. So we asked that relevant recognition was given to policy and legislation, to frontier workers and to cross-border employers. So it's really, really important that at that level there's a recognition that we have a very mobile workforce here. And it's happening regardless of the rules. People are doing it and then worrying about it afterwards. They don't understand what they've done whenever they take that cross-border job. There's so many opportunities out there, and with the right information, with the right guidance, with the right support, there's amazing opportunities to be had, and people shouldn't be put off. So I suppose that's what we're aiming to do, to give them as much information as we can, to support the advice sectors to do the best that they can, to give them a network that they can collaborate in, to create that space for collaboration. And I think we're doing that quite well. But we need more. We need more access to the collaboration space, and the services, I suppose, to be really well resourced. I could talk about this for days, so perhaps I'd move on to the next, if that's okay. Is that all right?
Sure, Annmarie, thanks. And I think it's an important point as well, I think, to recognise that the analysis that provides that information is also hugely important.
Yep.
And in a way, it's been quite a lone game for those involved in the actual analysis of where the 2 systems bump into each other. And that's actually something there is now a new cross-border regulation in the EU, which allows for the setting up of cross-border coordination points on internal EU borders, but also any member state may choose, if they wish, to set up equivalent arrangements on borders with third countries. I'm going to just leave that with the civil servants, the Irish civil servants in the room, because that's the provision of the regulation. It's called the Bridge for EU, and it allows for systematic collaboration on the analysis of these kinds of obstacles that may align with national policy priorities, like economic competitiveness. So I'm going to ask maybe Manus to continue that conversation around the issue of the information provision, the need to support the information provision. But Manus, from your perspective and where you stand, what are the issues facing people, sort of beyond the need to continue to provide information, which Annmarie has spoken very well about? What are the kind of issues you're seeing for people when you're actually engaging with them, or when you've engaged with them?
Thank you. So first of all, I've been lucky enough to have a career in advice for too long. I started in Derry and Strabane with the Citizens Advice, and I now currently work for North Connaught and Ulster Citizens Information Service. I'm also a frontier worker, and I've also been a friend of the Border People Project for about 14 or 15 years in various iterations of projects that have tried to address this issue. And as Annmarie pointed out, there's nothing new under the sun. It's the same issues for people that come up all the time. I think it's sort of important to emphasise the fact that there are institutions and organisations here in this room and elsewhere that are doing fantastic work for businesses. But at the end of the day, it's the advice sector that deals with the people that are actually mobile, the people that cross the borders every day of the week. What I have found is, and again, my career has been along that border corridor, first in Derry and Strabane and now in Donegal. And what I have found is that there's an absolute lack of free, independent, holistic advice at the point of need. And that's not just a slogan. Again, the people that, there are high income earners and talent acquisition that goes on where those skills are required. But the vast majority of people crossing the border are doing it on low and medium incomes, and they don't have access to that type of support. So they come to their advice providers, and those advice providers who are independent are able to navigate the intricacies of what that person faces, because it's going to be tax, it's going to be social insurance and social welfare, education, health, employment, housing, transport. Every aspect of their daily lives is going to be affected because they cross the border. Currently, the way advice provision is looked at, and indeed how the institutions themselves look at sort of issues for cross-border workers, is somewhat in isolation. So they're country-centric. So as Annmarie mentioned earlier, the Border People Project tries to bring the legislation from one jurisdiction and the legislation from another jurisdiction and see how it works. Whereas the people who cross the border are facing that dilemma every day of the week. And like, I can give you multiple examples of people who, and again, I'm aware that we have somewhat of a skewed position on this because we only deal with people where things have gone wrong. We only get to deal with the issues where something has went wrong. But, for example, I have people who have come to me after months and months of frustration, who are low to medium incomes, who have seen an opportunity in one jurisdiction, and they've jumped at it. And within 8 or 9 weeks, because the supports haven't been there, because primarily the advice at the point of need has not been there, those people have decided to give up that opportunity. They've decided to give up that job, or maybe never take it, because they can't get the information that they need. There's also an issue to do with how the governments themselves and the institutions themselves look at the issue of border working and frontier workers, because the departments and the systems are set up from a country-centric point of view. They don't acknowledge the frontier worker as a unique worker that is specific to Ireland. And sometimes whenever people engage with those departments, it's impossible for them to navigate that way through. So I think that the advice sector has a fantastic opportunity here to realise that what we actually need is a national strategy that's locally delivered. And it has to be properly resourced. And we have to recognise the fact that whenever you're dealing with a client who has a cross-border issue, you are dealing with 2 jurisdictions. You're dealing with 2 sets of tax laws. You're dealing with 2 sets of education, health, all the rest of it. So it's much more complex, and it takes much more time and much more resources to do it. And whenever you add an element of hybrid working and remote working, which is coming to the fore now after COVID, that's just mind-blowing.
Absolutely, and I think like in Europe, those kind of cross-border citizens information points, independent providers, the Grenzinfopunkte, for example, on the German border with different neighbouring countries, they are the points that are, seeing that they're providing the analysis. They're also quite often driving the cases and the case studies that actually then lead to engagement with national legislators, because these are the end users of policy. And these are the end users where policy doesn't join up. So I think it's really important. And I think also the point that you made about people losing opportunities, possibly because they haven't had the full information required in order to allow them to make an informed decision. And it's worth remembering that Annex 2, the Annex 2, Strand 2 of the agreement, the Good Friday Belfast 1998 agreement, as I like to call it, actually refers to the potential for North-South cooperation work to include the entitlements of cross-border workers, frontier workers. The frontier workers are therefore, at that point in time, were recognised as a group who needed particular interventions. I know it's not just a north-south issue, it's an east-west one. We'll come back to that when I'm talking to Owen. But it is worth saying, that was an area of, I think the last time something formal was commissioned on a north-south basis was 2002. So we're more than 20 years afterwards, but it seems to be that there's maybe potential for that to be looked at again, but in a dynamic way. So thank you, Manus. Kristel, listening to Manus and Annmarie, and obviously I want you to tell us a little bit about the focus of Epic Futures NI, and I suppose also in telling us what the kind of issues are that you're seeing coming up for people who are in those sort of groups that are distanced from the labour market. Do you see potential for solutions and supports in border areas? It could be cross-border. So I suppose tell us a little bit first about the population that you're actually researching at the moment.
So I suppose I'm bringing a slightly different angle, so I'm an academic researcher in Ulster University, and Epic Futures NI is seeking to provide an evidence base for fair and inclusive work. In saying that, we're obviously funded to do work in Northern Ireland because our funder is the UKRI. However, we do look at border regions, and we are hoping to extend our work into Ireland more broadly. I also have a different project, Atlantic Futures, which is a shared island project, where we also look at cross-border regional development issues across the west coast of the island of Ireland, which Caitriona is involved as well. So those two projects intersect with each other because we're really interested in skills and how particular groups who are facing specific challenges in accessing fair and meaningful work. A lot of the research we do looks at rural and peripheral regions, and as we know, a lot of the border regions fall within that, but then we also obviously have all the added complications that we've heard, a lot of the different panels talking about in terms of, the legalities of individuals trying to work in both jurisdictions. But our work really looks at the lived and felt experiences of people in places and really trying to illuminate who are the people working in these border regions, and what are their experiences, how do they feel, and we've heard a few of those already from the panels in terms of feeling that you are segregated from the labour market, that feeling that you're left behind from various opportunities across the island. The groups that we zoom in on are women, individuals with disabilities, and older workers. And whenever we look at the intersection between personal characteristics of people in places and then geography, so if we look at, as I said, peripheral rural regions, you know, and as I said, border regions which fall within that caption. The combination of those factors really, you know, one obviously impacts people who are working, you know, which we're discussing, but also impacts individuals' abilities to enter or re-enter work if they've maybe left the workplace. Some of the data and research that we're looking at, you know, particularly, you know, with some of the groups like individuals with disabilities and women, is if they're located, you know, in a border region and they're trying to enter the labour market, they're obviously disadvantaged, you know, due to location. So, and they often maybe have to take a job that doesn't match their skill set, so they end up being underemployed, you know, which obviously isn't ideal. Or else a lot of the times, you know, which we get, it comes across time and time again, and I see Lynn there from Women's Tech, you know, this issue about transportation, where individuals living in these areas and they want to take up opportunities to work, but because public transport is very poor, and then if you're trying to combine that with childcare, of trying to, you know, have a work-life balance, of being able to manage, you know, your personal circumstances, that then excludes groups who really want to work, you know, and often some of the research looks at them as almost being hidden unemployed because they want to work, they have the ability to work, they have great skills, but the infrastructure of, you know, combining their geographical location with the opportunities in those places means they either have to take a job that they're overqualified for, or they have to commute very long distances, which then might impact their work-life balance or their ability to I suppose, access certain opportunities. There is a real lack of, you know, there's so much knowledge in this room, but there's actually a lack of data and statistics on some of these issues. And obviously, you know, the Centre of Cross-Border Studies are doing great work, and they're one of our partners. And Aidan actually is doing a piece of work which we don't have the findings from yet, but he's looking at what does economic activity look like in the border regions, and, you know, why is it that in certain places that could be 1 mile or 2 miles from each other, what's the different factors as to why they might have far higher rates of economic activity compared to somewhere literally, you know, 5 miles down the road where it looks like structurally everything's the same, but it's actually not. So yeah, there's, you know, I think we really need a lot more data and research, so that's really what we're trying to look at.
More information, particularly on people, how people, place and work interact in that kind of model. That's very interesting. I mean, I'm very struck by that point in time where we're at now around understanding what digitalisation means, what remote working means, what, you know, the forced, you know, the emergency digitalisation that COVID caused and sort of drove meant for people, and there were all of the issues with that, and there are all the, you know, associated issues with what does productivity now look like in the workplace. But there was a huge liberation in that as well for a lot of people, and people were able to achieve balance of the kind that Clifford was talking about, you know, where work does not come first anymore, and recruiters, I think, are going to have to get their head around that. We have to get our head around the OECD stuff in terms of what does remote working mean for national, you know, central national-based taxation systems. All of that is work in progress. But Owen, I'm going to come to you now, and I mean, I suppose, in a way, first of all, it's great to have you on the panel. You and I began our policy journeys in the early 90s, whenever, you know, Ireland was still in, you know, considerable straits economically. We hadn't hit the boom. We knew what long-term unemployment looked like. We also know the role that the trade union movement had in shaping the content of the Good Friday Agreement, and all of the role that the National Social Partnership arrangements had in Ireland's competitiveness in, you know, into the noughties. So I suppose my question to you is, what does the trade union movement need to do about this now? Because it seems to me you've got some of this stuff is national government competency. So taxation, fiscal legislation is a national. It's not devolved in the Northern Ireland context, but economic policy in Northern Ireland is devolved. So there's that. There's the OECD stuff. There's, you know, where's the common denominator here? Is the common denominator Ireland and Ireland's competitiveness and what Ireland needs to do with the UK around these issues to enable? Do we need a revived approach to taxation and legislation?
Okay, I'll try and
Sorry,
handle that
I'll leave you
in
to
a few
I'll let you,
in a few moments.
let you handle that.
First of all, thanks very much, Caitriona, and thank you to everybody for the... Can you hear me, no? Yes, that's it. Thanks very much for the invite to be here. Maybe just a little bit about Congress. We represent 750,000 workers on the island of Ireland. Very proud of the fact that we're cross-community north of the border, something very, very important to us. Personally, I had the misfortune to be born in Dublin, but the fortune to have grown up in Donegal. And I live in Fermanagh and I work in Dublin, so Rose has frightened the life out of me with her contribution earlier on, as I'm sure she did with other people, and I'm sure her business will go through the roof after today with people wanting some consultations. But I suppose from a professional point of view, the things we're talking about today for our movement strike a chord with us professionally, but obviously personally as well, given my own background. Like in some ways, we talk about cross-border workers, and I think colleagues here have highlighted the distinct nature of them and the differences, but I want to maybe mention something where I think cross-border workers are no different to workers across the island of Ireland, and that's around the issue of voice and agency. And I'm really happy that the Centre has this panel, because so often we talk about the labour market. Usually it's just one side of the labour market. Usually it's just business. And usually workers are sometimes an afterthought. And sometimes at an all-island event like this, we sometimes tend to look at Northern Ireland as if it's this kind of pesky younger brother that hasn't got its act together, and that the Republic of Ireland is a kind of a mature young adult that has everything going for it. And I think when you flip up I suppose the engine of the shiny car, things on the surface look very good in the Republic of Ireland from a labour market point of view. But if you look under the bonnet, I think there's quite a few problems. The first thing I would say is we have a huge, huge deficit in the Republic of Ireland when it comes to employee voice. Workers in the Republic of Ireland have no right to an independent voice at the workplace. No right at all. And it's very interesting, the debate about hybrid working, and it's very interesting to see how some of the big banks that we bailed out reacted to their staff when it came to hybrid working. And it's about power, and this idea of presenteeism, everybody is working really hard, but they're not at home, is a nonsense. It's about power, and it's about culture, and it's about trust. And with some of the employers, it's about a lack of those things. But there's a huge deficit that workers do not have that independent voice. North of the border, since the mid-1990s, it's not perfect, but if you work in a firm with more than 21 employees, you have a right to an independent voice at the workplace. You can go through a process where you can get that. And south of the border, which is quite unique across the whole of Europe, the employers in the private sector essentially have a veto. If a union organises 90% of workers in a particular firm, we either have to use the power of persuasion, we try and persuade the employer to engage with us, and if that doesn't work, it's the persuasion of power. We have to have a strike. Now, I think in the 21st century, in a liberal, democratic, wealthy country, it's a scandal, quite frankly, that we have, quite frankly, a repressive regime. And I see a couple of colleagues here from NESC who do excellent work. Damien did some great work on employee voice and collective bargaining. And the days are past now where the employers turn up to NESC along with us in the community and voluntary sector and the environmental sector, where we all put our hand up in the air and say, yes, this is a great piece of work, and then we ignore it. Fergal made the point that there's 4 million people at work now on the island. When he was a student, it was just under 2, and we will have 5. There's a really important statistic, the Working in Ireland survey carried out in 2021. It's also going to be replicated in 2025. 2021, just Republic of Ireland. 2025, all island. It showed that 44% of workers in the Republic of Ireland, not in a union, wanted one. 67% of 16 to 24-year-olds, not in a union, wanted one. So there's a supply and demand issue there. Now, this is not a party political broadcast on behalf of the trade union movement that we want more workers who want to join unions. This is much more important than that. This is about our economy going forward. If we are serious about the challenges, and we know with the Trump craziness over the last number of months, we need to maintain FDI but de-risk. We know the domestic economy is weak. If you strip out the FDI stuff, look at our productivity, look at our lifelong learning. I'm talking about in the Republic of Ireland now. Look at our business investment, look at our exports. We perform poorly. Are we going to unleash the potential of 4 million people? Or the 44% who actually want an independent voice at work? Or are we going to hold back for some reason and say, no, even though we do it in Europe, we're not going to do it in the Republic of Ireland? Caoimhe Archibald, the Minister for the Economy, is here this afternoon. She is pioneering a very exciting employment bill. Keir Starmer's government is pioneering a very innovative employment bill. We have a European Union directive in the Republic of Ireland, which we hope the state will transpose, which will promote collective bargaining. But if we don't do these things, we are going to hit the skids in the road in the Republic of Ireland. And we are going to not move the economy and the labour market to the next level. And I think we really need to shine a light on the domestic economy. It could be much better. It should be much better. But if the idea is we're going to tie workers' hand behind their back and leave it all to the employers to fix the problems, well, we're not going to fix the problems. So I think voice and agency is crucial. And it's an Achilles heel in the Republic of Ireland. It is something that Northern Ireland is light years ahead on. And you know, the last thing I'll say is Strand 1, 2 and 3 is very important. The relations on the island and across these islands are important. I'm very concerned if we have greater divergence when it comes to employee voice in the labour market. And if we're not careful, we will be held back in the Republic of Ireland. Northern Ireland will improve and Britain will improve. And, you know, we know both those jurisdictions need to improve when it comes to their economy. If we really want to enhance it, we need to give those people who want employee independent voice in the workplace the right to have that. Those that don't, that's fine. But there's a demand for it, and I think we need to address it urgently.
Thanks, Owen. So, and I mean, indeed, I think it was actually, again, going back to the early noughties, the trade union movement was actually very instrumental in giving cross-border workers a voice, because at the time it was the TNG, then Unite, who set up the X branch, which was for all of the cross-border workers who had emerged because of the amount of European funded projects. So there were suddenly hundreds of people who had no representation, but who also had these issues in the border region. And actually I was one of the people who joined that branch at the time, back in 2003 or whenever it was. So there is that sort of sense of community that I think comes for employees, of being part of a wider community of interest. And for border workers and for frontier workers, that's hugely important as well, because there are additional challenges. Coming back then to that idea of, you know, the trade union movement as a voice in a national conversation about things like taxation, which again, you know, affect workers, but they also affect employers. They are the issues that are disincentivizing people to either take jobs or offer jobs. What's needed? Do we need a special working group on taxation, bilateral taxation? Where does it need to be driven from? Does it need to be driven from Dublin, Belfast, London, or a combination of all three?
Well, I think, I think the employers and the trade union movement should really, after the first panel discussion and the focus that Rose put on it, we really need to agree that we make this a priority for all workers and all businesses that operate cross-border on the island of Ireland. And we should be at one on that. And I think we should do it for a number of reasons. One, because it's the right thing to do, but secondly, it takes out the practical, like everyone should have, irrespective of people's view on the Constitution and how people view that and their identity and all that important cultural stuff, everyone should aspire to have the best possible life for themselves and their family, have the best arrangements at work. The employers should have the best potential business and innovative approaches that they can have. And the state's plural infrastructure should not impede that and hinder that. And I actually think if we can, and that's why the LEAF report that the Centre and many people participate in is really, really important. And it's really important we popularise that beyond very important events like this, but to the wider citizenry. But it's crucial to do it because we need to take the heat out of the future discussion on the island of Ireland. I mean, I would much prefer people make a decision on the constitutional issue based on, you know, how they feel rather than pragmatism on tax issues and things like that. Let's take those contentious, challenging issues out of that conversation and think about, be more ambitious about the future. So I think, certainly I think we and IBEC, and I know Fergal's here and Michael and others, we should work together as participants in LEAF to try and make it a priority. I should say LEAF is very light touch, it's consultation, it's not making policy, but given that we're an all-island body, and I know IBEC have great relations with CBI and other bodies, we should see this as a serious issue and address it with government. But also, we have to address it with the UK government. I mean, tax is not a devolved issue in Northern Ireland, and this is where I think social dialogue within the Republic and within Northern Ireland, north, south and east, west, could pay fruits. And, now that we have, the adults in the room in Britain, although they're struggling after a decade of Tory rule, and they're in a bit of bother, at least they will engage with unions and employers in a kind of a balanced way, unlike the Tories. So I think we could do something on it.
Okay, so maybe we need labour mobility and labour markets to be part of the East-West collaboration priorities as well, at that sort of multi-level as well. Annmarie, did you want to come in there?
When we're thinking about solutions, when I first spoke there, I talked about information and providing advice and guidance, but that's talking about the obstacles that we have at the moment. So obviously we want to chip the corners off those or maybe remove them altogether. So looking into the future, that collaboration is absolutely essential, and making sure that the right people are around the table, making sure that we utilise the institutions that we have. We have all the foundations sitting there. Even before the Good Friday Agreement, we have that common travel area, or the common movement area. I like that phrase used earlier on. So we have the mechanisms here. We have the data. We have the experts. The experts are within LEAF, within the advice sectors. The single jurisdiction data that is gathered by the Citizens Information Service and the Advice Service in Northern Ireland, that tells the story. All the information is there. So if we get the right people in the room, the solutions will be quickly, will become apparent. Looking to other places, though, might take the heat off us a little bit, because there's no point in recreating the wheel. And you mentioned Base Solutions already. There's many examples of where places have found other solutions. And we noted some of them in LEAF. The project's been talking about them for many years before that in the LEAF report. There's much learning to be had, and there's no point in recreating the wheel. Making sure that there's good collaboration, the right people are around the table is crucial. Making sure that we use our north-south institutions to get that information driving through to Strand 3 is, we have all the vehicles.
Sure, and I think you've made a really clear point as well, but it's one thing to have really, really good quality, well-funded information on precisely how complex your situation is and how apparently insolvable the obstacles are. It's also important to have that work done around the obstacles, that analytical and translational piece. And I think, for those in the room who are involved in government administration, it's not simple. Countries have to work at this. They do work at it. You look at the Benelux Union, they are absolutely dedicated to trying to promote labour mobility because they know they need it. They are a collection of small countries. The Nordic Council of Ministers, similar, on an external border. I'm going to facilitate something in 2 weeks' time on labour mobility as a domain for European enlargement in the Western Balkans. These are issues that governments themselves need support on, need to draw on supports, to be in a community of practice on, and then work out what is best for their people together. And I think that comes back to what Owen's saying as well about that idea of just those conversations, east-west and north-south. Kristel, is there anything jumping out at you on this so far?
I suppose from my side, as I said, I'm always data research side, and I think the advances to date with the All Island, labour market intelligence dashboards, portals, I think it's amazing all the different support and advice that's out there. But what we keep hearing is people don't know where to go. So there's so much information, so many websites, so much great work, so many reports. Everyone in this room probably has reports and data. And then whenever we're working with our policymakers who are part of our project as well, there's that frustration on one, policy time cycles, as to sometimes data isn't coming in at the right time for them to use it to make decisions, or two, they might know it's there because they're under time pressures. So There's, everyone always keeps talking about, can we have like a one-stop shop that's signposts to where all the information, research, data is, and there's loads of organisations here that are, trying to do that. One thing that we're hoping to pilot, well, we have a tender out at the minute, is rather than, so it's linked to a new sort of labour market observatory, but what we're intending to do is actually, rather than it being a new observatory, is we're piloting a platform that's going to use AI and natural language querying to then draw upon all the other labour market intelligence, data, dashboards, sites, which hopefully we might reach out to some people in the room once we have it up and running to see if people want to come on board to pilot it. So I think there's like a bit of a tech solution as well with using like AI now and advances in AI, and how people can access and understand this data and try and democratize access to this information for people who aren't economists, aren't policy researchers, aren't academic researchers, because the employees, the people in these border regions, where we're talking about even businesses coming to locate in the island, don't understand, what it is, even though there's all this information for them. So is there a way of using natural language, querying to allow them to do that, maybe?
Sounds interesting. And of course, there's also the regional infrastructure tracker and the work that the regional assemblies in the south have done on this idea of democratising that data and making it accessible, and to have that work going on in Northern Ireland as well would give you a full set of territorial data for the island. So that's definitely something I know there'll be lots of people in the room who'll be interested in talking about that further. Kristel. Manus, what's jumping out at you as we come almost to the end? I'm going to throw it open to the floor just for about 5 minutes before we finish.
I suppose again, as an advice worker, we would deal with the practical application of the legislation to somebody's situation. So for me, I'm looking at immediate practical solutions, or at least ways of making things better. So for example, employers could put information in candidate application packs to do with frontier workers. Trade unions could do a lot more with their shop stewards and a lot more on their social media profiles to highlight that there are issues with frontier working, so that people aren't going on blind. Government departments, for example, could start producing application forms that deal only with Ireland and Northern Ireland in that context, and not the UK and the EU, which bamboozles everybody, including me, whenever I'm trying to help people fill in the forms. Government departments that have a digital strategy could tailor that digital strategy to meet this unique island, so that whenever somebody goes on revenue and puts in their address with a postcode, it triggers a system whereby they're confined or asked the right questions so that they can get their tax position right. But I think ultimately, again, it comes back to the advice sector, because we are the people that deal with those employees. And we have to be very honest in this, that business cannot operate without staff. And if they're looking to attract people and to entice people to cross the border, somebody has to be able to answer those questions at the time of application for the job. And that rests with the advice sector, both in the north and in the south, and that's why we really need to address that piece.
Okay, so there's something about partnership with employers, public and private there. There's something about building capacity of public administration systems to work in an island economy informed way. And there's also probably something there also about the experience that the independent advice providers have that could perhaps help with the development of administrative or legislative solutions. So I think there's a piece of work there that, I can see the IBEC people down there with their backs to the wall. And, I think certainly conversations can come out of this. I think we know how to do this. We know we have the template for doing this. So that's really interesting. I sometimes think we're at a point now, we've got all of this infrastructure, and it's a bit like European enlargement. We've all of these tools for sort of making borders smoother that we didn't have in 2004 in the EU, and now we have them, and now we're looking at the Balkans, and there are loads of land borders in the Balkans, loads and loads and loads of border people. So it's actually a really exciting time to be discussing these things, and I sometimes think, what would T.K. Whitaker now think of where the island of Ireland finds itself, and what would he advise? Does anybody from the floor want to make any final comments? I know Anthony's looking at me saying I've got about 3 minutes, 5 minutes. Yes, and the Epic Futures video, and I'm not wearing my glasses, I'm squinting. Thank you. So, Leo, briefly.
Have we ever put the concept of public pensions in scope? Because people can be in one jurisdiction with one government department making contributions to a contributory pension. My understanding, if they move to the other jurisdiction, they go back to year zero. And the point of that, a lot of people are factoring that in now to decisions. It could be an instrument of rigidity that people said, well, I'm working in the Department of the Economy, I live in Lisnaskea, I've got an opportunity to live in, to work in Pedigo for the Department of Social Justice, whatever, in the Republic, but I'm really concerned that it built up 15 years of my pension and I go back to zero. So I wonder if pensions a rigidity factor as more people think about their pensions.
Yeah, this is something for the political class. The generation that carried the agreement are now thinking about their pensions. That's quite a lot of pressure. Michael Darcy, your hand was up in response to that, and there's someone down the back.
It's just to say something maybe more as the elder lemon in the room. There's been a lot of reference to the Good Friday Agreement, and one of the things perhaps we don't pay enough attention to is the principle enshrined under safeguards and equality of the right to equal opportunity in all social and economic activity, regardless of class, creed, disability, gender, or ethnicity. As someone who's been around a while, the Leaf report emphasised that the problems of the past perhaps have got worse today, but we need to be careful that the problem of today that's going to be with us in the future is also dealt with in the context of the all-island labour market, 1 in 4 of whom in the Republic are now not necessarily from this island or may not look like they're Irish citizens, but they are. And I just think in our conversations here, and it's been missing this morning, we need to include that dimension. We haven't mentioned the common travel area, we haven't mentioned access to work, the right, citizenship, how all that interacts, the differences, etc. And I just think it's important that we understand, particularly what's happening out there with the rise in racism, the attacks on individuals, the people of communities who don't look like us, and I say that as a white Irish person, and the fear that they're feeling that in the past we would only attach to sectarianism is now more prevalent in both societies. It's a shared, really serious shared problem that's undermined our sense of stability and safety, and that's seeping into the workplace naturally in a challenge for employees and employers. But the Good Friday Agreement in its principles has the antidote, and I just think as part of our use of the agreement, and particularly the role of the NSMC with the capacity to bring that together, that shouldn't be forgotten.
Absolutely, very well made, Michael. And remembering that an all-island labour market isn't just about people who are entitled to mobility under the common travel area, and that's hugely important. Again, I've one person down here, and then I'll come back here, if that's okay. There's the woman in the purple dress. No, hand gone down again. Okay. Oh no, okay, fine. Okay, one more here, and then we'll go to the video, and then we'll wrap up. Thank you.
I think from all the panels so far, what's come out as a theme is that in order to address a lot of these issues, we need to define the group of people that they affect. So do you think defining frontier workers and frontier employers in legislation would be a start? Is that something that's been considered by the panel?
We said that right at the very start, though. That was one of the...
I mean, I suppose I'm interested from a lawyer's point of view on this as well. Are we running into problems if we start to define frontier workers in legislation, or can we come up with a definition that is inclusive?
The definition that's usually used for frontier workers stems from EU. It's the EU definition of a frontier worker and a cross-border worker. And actually, in social security terms, they actually are two different things, two different rights and entitlements. So we need to be very specific about who we're talking about here on this island. It needs to be very specific. They need to consider not just the worker, but also the fact that the employer exists as well, that they have a stake here in the all-island labour market. So making sure that there is some recognition within whatever legislation that comes about, and the consultation I mentioned, the Good Jobs consultation, we did mention that we wanted that the Centre recommended relevant policy-related and legislation-related consideration be given to those two groups. Once the definition is set, once we've agreed it at that UK-Ireland level, but very specific to the island, it becomes much, much easier for all of the rest of the things to fall into place. and that's why we put it into the consultation, and we've been talking about it for quite a while before that.
It still requires the work of the spanner in the middle of the system, and taxation and social protection and all of those things that are necessary also for economic sense as well. So I think there's a conversation to be had about which comes first. You know, do you remove legislative obstacles from existing arrangements so that they don't detrimentally affect frontier workers, or do you protect frontier workers first and then have everything spent on that? But it's a very good question, and it sounds like we need another forum on this going forward. Anthony, yes, I'm winding up. Listen, can I just thank all of you for your attention, particularly in the pre-lunch slot, and to the members of the panel, and I hope you'll all continue your conversations for the rest of the day. And I'm going to now hand over to the screen, which is on Epic Futures NI, led by Kristel on my right.
The real key motivation behind Epic Futures NI was to really tackle Northern Ireland's core place-based challenges, and one of those core challenges is economic inactivity.
What we can bring as researchers is very much in-depth understanding of the issues on a very balanced way.
To be involved in something where co-design is very much at the centre is of tremendous value.
We do truly hope that the research that we do, the collaborations that we make, will have a legacy beyond this initial phase and continue to develop for many years to come.
That was a fantastic panel to nearly wind up the morning session as we approach lunch, which will be in a few minutes' time. But you may remember that last year, those of you who were here, we had an additional contributor to the conference. Thanks to our friends at the United States Consulate, we had astronaut Katie Coleman come and speak with us in person. We're going to have an additional contributor now, but not in person, although just like Katie, it's an out-of-the-world speaker, I'm pleased to say. We're going to have a contributor now who is fluent in Irish and English, fluent in Italian and in French, who, if our friends at the US Consul don't mind me saying it, as a qualified attorney at law in New York State, would be very busy given what's happening over there at the minute. But he doesn't do any of that. He has for 20 years been a TD and is Minister of State for European Affairs and Defence. So on the screen, can we welcome as the contributor taking us into lunch, the Minister for European Affairs in the South, and then after lunch we'll hear from the Minister from Northern Ireland. So Minister Thomas Byrne.
Ladies and gentlemen, at the outset I would like to acknowledge the valuable work of the Centre for Cross-Border Cooperation, which has for many years been a strategic partner of the Government's Reconciliation Fund. Gatherings and discussions, such as you're having here today in County Louth, have an important part to play in strengthening cross-border connections, building trust and exchanging knowledge. From a political perspective, cross-border cooperation is as strong now as it has been for several years. The North-South Ministerial Council, established of course under Strand 2 of the Good Friday Belfast Agreement, is the linchpin of North-South political engagement. The North-South Ministerial Council is an integral part of the Good Friday architecture, and we are committed to doing all that we can to ensure that its discussions remain as relevant and as dynamic as possible. We've seen the most recent plenary meetings addressed topical issues such as business and trade matters, ending violence against women and girls and the mother and baby institutions, Magdalen laundries and workhouses. From an economic perspective, we're also in a very positive place. The most recent trade figures from Intertrade Ireland show clear momentum behind the all-island economy, with cross-border trade in goods increasing by 5% last year to a total of €10.6 billion. The recent uncertainty generated around US tariffs was an unwelcome development, of course, but thankfully neither all-out trade wars nor radically different tariff regimes between the two jurisdictions on the island have come to pass. As Minister of State for European Affairs, I want to acknowledge the incredible efforts and the incredible knowledge of EU Trade Commissioner Maroš Šefčovič and of course his team in achieving the outcome. For our part, the Irish Government made sure that the particular situation of Northern Ireland was taken into account in all discussions on trade and tariff issues. This is a focus we will continue to bring to our engagements at EU, UK and US levels. There are grounds for optimism for continued strong all-island economic growth, not least because of the unique and advantageous position of businesses in Northern Ireland with their dual market access arrangements. Dual access is only possible by virtue of the Windsor Framework, which, notwithstanding its complexities, ensures the integrity of the EU single market and protects the all-island economy. While the commitment of the European Union and the United Kingdom to pursue an SPS agreement is really welcome, that will take time, and it's important that in the meantime, the Windsor Framework continues to be implemented in full. There are, however, certain structural issues which it would be wrong to ignore, and I welcome the emphasis in the conference discussions today on the all-island labour market and cross-border worker mobility. There are complex taxation, social protection and other issues that impact on worker mobility on the island and that stand to be addressed. The Government is, for its part, committed to working with the Northern Ireland Executive, the United Kingdom Government and through the Government's Labour Employer Economic Forum, or LEAF, to see how we can together address any issues and best harness the full benefits of the island-wide labour market. On cross-border and all-island cooperation more broadly, the Irish Government continues to invest in our collective future on this island through the Shared Island Initiative. We have committed in the current programme for government for a further €1 billion in Shared Island funding up to 2035 to foster reconciliation, mutual respect and growth across the island. Already, the major new Shared Island Enterprise Scheme delivered by Intertrade Ireland, Enterprise Ireland and Invest Northern Ireland is supporting female entrepreneurship, clustering and sustainability investment by firms with a total of €30 million from the Government's Shared Island Fund. The Government has also allocated €30 million from the Shared Island Fund for a Shared Island Enterprise Scheme. Alongside infrastructure investment, the research strand of the initiative is exploring economic opportunities from greater cooperation on the island. On tourism, Tourism Ireland, Fáilte Ireland and Tourism Northern Ireland are, in partnership with local authorities north and south, investing in cross-border tourism amenities at Kearney Loch, the Cuilca Lakelands Geopark and the Slieve Bay region, supported with over €20 million announced by the Government in February. And at the start of this month, Taoiseach Micheál Martin and Agriculture Ministers North and South announced new awards totalling €9 million to support two major new biorefinery demonstrator projects that will collaborate across the island. These and other commitments to our Shared Island Initiative are harnessing the full potential of our border regions and the benefits of the island-wide economy for all. In closing, I want to thank you all for your commitment to cross-border cooperation and for your continued work to promote genuine and real engagement at all levels across this island of ours. This is a shared island that is on the move, creating opportunity, driving prosperity, drawing people and communities closer together. It's an exciting time, full of possibility and full of potential. We must do all that we can to make sure that this potential is realised. Gurv míle maith agah go léir. Thank you all very much.
Thanks to Minister Byrne. I have never been at an event where there's been so much talk of pensions. So you've got an hour to go in and not talk about pensions. Lunch is going to be served now in the room where tea and coffee was. Can you be back here promptly at, well, in an hour at 1:15 or 2:15? What time? 2:15. Thank you.